right-wing influencers suggest will give men the dignity of work. I mean, reputable economists have said that, building factories, bringing manufacturing back to the United States is a multi-year, sometimes decade-long investment, and executives are not going to make these investments based on the mercurial whim of our 80-year-old term-limited president who has a addiction to hamburgers and ketchup steak. But I think the foundational insult that we're seeing from these right-wing influencers is that masculinity and manhood is rooted not in redeemable qualities like compassion or sensitivity, but rather men's abilities to perform grunt work in service of Donald Trump's haphazard and destructive economic policies. So I think it just speaks to the fact that the MAGA movement is fueled by a lot of men who are lacking in self-esteem.
That last bite we played from Caroline Levitt, that was talking about the apparent feud between Elon Musk and Trump trade advisor Peter Navarro, who Musk called, quote, truly a moron. When you encourage this kind of macho culture, does that lead to this kind of clash of egos?
Absolutely. And I think, in her comments, it's very telling. She says, boys will be boys. And that's really the problem. I was thinking about this Kendrick Lamar quote he directed at Drake last year, where he said, I'm knowing they call you the boy, but where's the man? Because I ain't seen him yet. And I think the problem here is that we don't need boys leading our government or making our economic policies. We need adults. And so the idea that Caroline Levitt is pushing, which is that manhood is rooted in conflict rather than sensibility, is dangerous. And we're seeing it play out in our economics right now.
And in fact, economists, they've said tariffs are not going to bring manufacturing back to the U.S. to the scale that Trump wants. I mean, you've touched on this. And likewise, Trump's executive order on energy, that isn't expected to bring, say, coal production back. So what happens when this doesn't work? Will the hyper-masculine talk simply shift to the next thing to blame?
Well, you're already seeing now, there are men who blame women for their psychological woes, their economic woes right now. So inevitably, when this promise that Trump and his far-right cadre of influencers are pushing doesn't come into fruition, you're just going to see a lot more of what you're seeing now, which is insecure men misdirecting their angst toward women rather than the illiberal regime that is leading us right now.
So to that end, we saw sexist attacks on Kamala Harris during the campaign. The election showed a growing gender gap, even among young Americans. Is this trend reversible? And if it is, how?
I think this trend is reversible, and I think, last year I wrote about this, but the biggest crisis, not just in the United States, but globally, is this rise of hyper-masculinity, what I defined as MAGA masculinity. You're not even just seeing this in the United States, in places like El Salvador, where the self-described world's coolest dictator, Nayib Bukele, who's visiting the White House tomorrow, by the way, he pushes a lot of the same hyper-masculine schlock. You see the same thing from Hungarian leader Viktor Orban, Argentinian leader Javier Milei, obviously Vladimir Putin as well. So all of these leaders have found that they can exploit men's lack of self-esteem, exploit their angst to advance their political goals. So this is an issue, and I think that the way that we combat it is just by instructing men that there are many more things that they can do with their quote-unquote, with their, identity as being men beyond conquest and conquering. I was very fortunate to be raised by men who taught me that sensitivity and comprehension and understanding of other people's emotions are actually beneficial, and that these things are enriching and fruitful in our society. So I think when we have more direct training about the downsides of hypermasculinity and the people who are trying to exploit it, I think that's what's going to jar men from this faux bravado that's so toxic these days.
Your dad did a good job, Jahan. Thank you so much. Thank you for joining me.